Mylo Grent walked into St. Veora Psychiatric Hospital seeking peace. 3 days later, he vanished without a trace. His sister, Calia Grent, uncovered a hidden ward, a missing doctor, and paintings that should never exist. What began as a disappearance turned into a terrifying journey through a dream. Experiment gone wrong, and the nightmare was just beginning. Mylo Grent had always been different. A soft-spoken artist from the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, he lived in a world shaped more by dreams than reality. His home was filled with strange, unsettling paintings, twisted corridors, floating figures, landscapes that seemed to melt into shadows. Those who knew him described him as kind but deeply isolated. He rarely left his studio, except for long midnight walks. As the years passed, Mylo's grip on reality weakened. He began to speak about recurring dreams that felt more vivid than waking life. He claimed he could hear whispers in the static of his radio, and that someone or something was waiting for him in his sleep. After a particularly alarming episode in early spring, Mylo checked himself into St. Veora Psychiatric Hospital. The facility had a sterile, modern exterior, but a reputation that made people uneasy. It was nestled between overgrown woods and a silent lake, and rumors had long surrounded the place. Some said the hospital specialized in unusual treatments. Others whispered about missing patients and hushed lawsuits. But to Mylo, it represented a chance for clarity. He believed he needed help, and he was willing to trust professionals to give it. On March 3rd, Mylo entered the hospital voluntarily. He was calm, cooperative, and brought a small bag containing sketchbooks, pencils, and one change of clothes. Staff recorded his arrival, assigned him room 207, and scheduled a preliminary evaluation for the following morning. Over the next 3 days, he participated in routine sessions and appeared stable, though he remained mostly quiet. Nurses described him as observant and alert. One even noted in her log that he seemed to be studying the walls and ceilings, as if they were familiar. Then, without warning, Mylo vanished. It happened sometime during the third night. A nurse entered room 207 to deliver his evening medication and found the bed empty. His shoes, bag, and sketchbook were still neatly arranged. His meal from earlier remained half-eaten. The window was locked from the inside. The door had no signs of forced exit. Surveillance cameras in the hallway showed no sign of him leaving his room, nor walking down any corridor. No staff reported seeing him after dinner. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. The hospital staff initially assumed a clerical error. Perhaps he had been moved for observation or mistakenly discharged. But a complete review of records showed no such action. The police were called within 12 hours. They conducted a full search of the facility, starting with the grounds and surrounding forest. K-9 units were brought in. Nothing was found. Footprints, no scent trail, no signs of struggle. His room was dusted for fingerprints, all of which belonged to Mylo or the nursing staff. The security system had no malfunctions. None of the doors had been opened from the inside that night. Mylo's family was contacted. His sister Calia arrived the next morning, frantic and demanding answers. She said Mylo would never leave without telling her. His disappearance sparked local news coverage, but the hospital downplayed the incident. Administrators insisted Mylo must have left of his own accord and claimed they were cooperating fully with law enforcement. But behind closed doors, staff whispered otherwise. Some believed the building itself had secrets. A few even admitted they'd heard odd sounds coming from below the hospital pipes, groaning without water, soft footsteps in locked wings, cold drafts in sealed rooms. As days turned to weeks, the case went cold. No new leads, no sightings, no activity on Mylo's bank or phone. The police concluded he had either left and disappeared willingly or suffered an accident on the grounds that left no trace. His case was archived with dozens of others unsolved. unexplained and eventually forgotten by all but those closest to him. But to Calia, something was wrong, deeply wrong. She couldn't shake the feeling that Mylo hadn't simply vanished. He had been taken or trapped somewhere within the hospital itself, and she was determined to find out what had happened. No matter what she uncovered, the official investigation into Mylo Grent's disappearance stalled within a month. With no evidence of foul play and no trail to follow, police quietly stepped back, but Calia Grent refused to let the case fade. Every sleepless night brought her back to the same question. How could her brother vanish from a locked psychiatric hospital with no witnesses, no escape route, and no explanation? She knew something wasn't right. The hospital had brushed it off too quickly, and the staff, though polite, seemed rehearsed in their responses, like they were hiding something they didn't dare speak aloud, driven by a growing sense of dread. Calia began her own investigation. She pored through news archives, hospital reviews, and obscure legal filings. In the process, she discovered a disturbing pattern. St. Veora had a history of quietly settling lawsuits out of court cases filed by families of patients who were declared unresponsive, missing, or dead under mysterious circumstances. None of the cases made headlines. There were no formal criminal charges, but there were whispers of unethical treatments, excessive sedation, and experimental procedures. Then came a breakthrough. Calia posted about Mylo's case on a local forum for mental health advocacy. Days later, she received a private message from someone named Laszlo Krem. He claimed to be a former nurse at St. Veora and warned her not to trust anyone tied to the hospital. After some convincing, Calia agreed to meet him in a neutral public place. Laszlo appeared nervous, constantly looking over his shoulder. He seemed deeply unsettled by what he was about to share. According to Laszlo, the key to Mylo's disappearance might lie in a part of the hospital no one outside the staff knew about, a hidden level beneath the building called Ward S. Officially, it didn't exist. It wasn't on any public floor plan, and staff were forbidden to speak of it. But Laszlo claimed to have been inside. He described it as a cold, windowless wing beneath the foundation, accessible only through a locked stairwell, behind the unused laundry hall. Ward S, he said, was used for special patients, those who were selected for off-the-books psychiatric experiments, run by a now-defunct internal research group. The details chilled Calia. Laszlo described patients being removed from standard care and taken down to Ward S. Once they were transferred, they were never seen again. Staff were told the patients had been released or transferred to other facilities, but no discharge records ever surfaced. Laszlo's suspicions grew when he overheard conversations between senior doctors, discussing reactivity trials and dream phase mapping. When he asked questions, he was immediately put on leave and terminated 2 weeks later. He tried contacting the authorities, but no one took him seriously. They dismissed him as a disgruntled ex-employee with no proof. Calia needed to confirm his claims. She contacted a retired architect, Silas Dorn, who had once worked on St. Veora's original expansion. After some persuasion, he agreed to meet. Silas reviewed his old records and confirmed that there had been a proposed lower level, an annex, designed to hold long-term patients during an influenza outbreak decades ago. But the blueprints for that level were later removed from public files and never included in renovation plans. According to Silas, there's only one way to access it, and that entrance had been walled off and disguised during later construction. Armed with this knowledge, Calia went back to the hospital. She posed as a journalist and asked for a tour under the pretense of covering mental health advancements. As she walked the halls, she noted everything: the placement of doors, the sound of her footsteps, the way certain areas seemed oddly silent. She eventually located the laundry hall mentioned by Laszlo. The area was marked "Maintenance Authorized Personnel Only." It looked abandoned, with dim lighting and peeling paint. At the end of the corridor, behind stacked cleaning carts, was a steel door with no handle, only a keycard panel beside it. She snapped a photo before being ushered away by staff. That night, Calia stared at the image on her phone, heart pounding. She knew without a doubt. This door led to Ward S. Whatever happened to Mylo, whatever truth the hospital had buried, it was behind that door. Calia Grent could no longer wait for justice to find its way through official channels. The hospital had ignored her. The police had turned their backs. If her brother had vanished inside St. Veora, then she would uncover the truth herself, even if it meant breaking into a place that had already swallowed him whole. Using the photo she had taken of the steel door behind the laundry hall, Calia traced the panel type and learned it was a discontinued access system. She managed to purchase a used keycard duplicator from an online forum and returned to the hospital 2 nights later. Under the cover of darkness, she knew the security rotation from her tour and used that knowledge to slip inside through a back service entrance. The hospital was silent. Most of the lights were off, casting long shadows through the halls. She moved quickly but carefully, her heart racing with every step. When she reached the laundry corridor, she found the steel door just as before. This time, she used her makeshift device to override the keycard reader. With a soft buzz, the panel blinked green. The lock clicked open. The door groaned as she pushed it inwards, revealing a stairwell descending into pure blackness. The air was thick and cold, heavy with the scent of mildew and chemicals. Calia used a flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness as she descended the steps. The walls were concrete, unpainted and cracked. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a long hallway lined with metal doors. Above them, a rusted sign barely legible in the dim light read, "Sword, Level 3. She moved cautiously, checking each door. Most were open or unsealed, revealing small padded rooms, each with a metal bed bolted to the floor. The rooms were stripped bare, but traces of past occupants remained. Scratches etched into the walls, torn hospital gowns. One room had a single shoe lying in the corner. Another had tally marks scratched into the floor, hundreds of them. Stretching across the tiles. Near the end of the hall, Calia found a locked cabinet. Inside it were stacks of old files, dusty and yellowed with age. She quickly scanned them, her hands shaking. The files were written by hand, in neat but aggressive cursive. Each one listed patient numbers, behavioral summaries, and procedural notes. Most were marked with a red stamp, unstable or terminated. She flipped through the papers until one name made her freeze. Grent, Mylo. His file was thin but recent. The first page described his unusually high cognitive reactivity and persistent visual spatial distortions. The second page referenced something called the Dream Suspension Protocol. Phase 2. It stated that Mylo had not responded well to treatment, had become resistant, and had shown signs of interference. The final line reads simply, "Subject removed. To room 13. Isolation advised. Monitor remotely." Calia's breath caught in her throat. She looked around. There had been only 12 rooms before. But then she saw a narrow side hall, easy to miss, tucked between structural beams. At the end was a door with a thick industrial lock. A faded number was stenciled on it, 13. Her hands trembled as she unlocked it using a key she found. Taped to the inside of Mylo's file folder, the door opened with effort. Inside was a small room, completely covered in black foam padding. Even the floor absorbed sound. There were no lights, no bed, no window. But there were red markings on the walls, hundreds of them, words written over and over again in frantic handwriting. "It sees you when you dream. It sees you when you dream." At the center of the room was something even more disturbing. A canvas. It was one of Mylo's paintings, though worn and faded. It unmistakably bore his style, chaotic brushstrokes and surreal imagery. The painting, showed a hallway just like the one Calia had walked through, but twisted and stretched as if melting. And in the background, barely visible, stood a dark figure with empty eyes. Calia stumbled back, overwhelmed with emotion and horror. Mylo had been there. He had been held in room 13, and somehow he had painted what no one was supposed to see. She took photos of everything, knowing she had to get the evidence out. But just as she turned to leave, she heard faint footsteps, echoing in the hall. Slow, deliberate, and coming closer. She killed the flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, heart racing. In the pitch-black silence of Ward S, the nightmare was no longer just a painting. It had become real. Calia didn't breathe. The footsteps outside room 13 were slow and deliberate, like someone or something knew she was there but wasn't in a hurry to find her. Trapped in pitch darkness, the only sound was her pounding heart and the faint squeak of worn shoes. On concrete, she gripped her flashlight tightly but didn't dare turn it back on. Instead, she slid silently behind the open door, praying whoever was in the hallway would pass without looking inside. After what felt like an eternity, the footsteps stopped. There was silence. Then, a faint scraping noise like fingers brushing. Along the wall outside, Calia shut her eyes, paralyzed. Finally, the steps began again, fading slowly into the distance, echoing down the corridor. She waited another 5 minutes, frozen, before she dared move. When she stepped back into the hallway, it was empty, shaken, but determined. Calia retraced her steps toward the stairwell, clutching Mylo's file and the camera containing photos of room 13 and the strange painting. Just as she reached the stairs, she noticed another door slightly ajar near the back of the corridor. It hadn't been opened before. Something told her to ignore it and leave while she could, but curiosity and desperation for the truth pulled her closer. Inside was a storage room filled with old equipment and rusted filing cabinets. Most were empty or water damaged, but one drawer held a set of sealed folders labeled Project Somnix. Inside were a series of typed reports, graphs, and diagrams. Calia read through them quickly, and the pieces began to fall into place. Project Somnix was a clandestine psychological study conducted in partnership with a now-defunct pharmaceutical company. The goal was to manipulate human consciousness through controlled dream environments. Patients who showed strong lucid dreaming potential like Mylo were sedated, their brainwave patterns altered, and their dreams shaped through external stimuli. Sound, scent, light pulses, and medications. The theory was that, within a dream, trauma could be extracted or overwritten like corrupted code. But the side effects were catastrophic. Patients lost touch with reality, some refused to wake up, and others described being followed by entities inside their dreams, figures with no faces who watched and whispered. One internal memo warned that some patients had brought something back with them. Calia flipped to the final report. It referenced a resurgence of testing in 2023, a new series of patients added to the lucid pool, and a name written at the bottom, Dr. Elwin Haar. She froze. That name had come up before, briefly mentioned in a lawsuit from 2007 after a lab fire. Haar had supposedly died in the incident. But here he was, listed as active and conducting new trials. The documents implied something far worse than unethical research. They hinted at the belief that consciousness could detach from the body and remain inside a shared dreamscape. In one memo, a note was scribbled in the margin: subjects report same figure. Multiple sightings across patients. Shadow with eyes. Appears during phase breach. Calia backed out of the room, her mind reeling. Not only had her brother been trapped in some kind of manufactured dream, but there was a pattern, a dark force observed by others, a presence that somehow bled through shared hallucinations. She had thought she was investigating a disappearance, but it was something more, something unnatural. When she reached the main floor of the hospital and exited into the cool night air, it was almost surreal. Everything outside looked normal: trees swaying gently, stars glinting overhead. She drove home in silence, clutching the stolen documents like lifelines. The next morning, she received a package at her front door. No postage, no return address. Inside were 13 canvases, each wrapped in stained hospital bedding. They were Mylo's paintings, undeniably his. But he had never painted these while free. Each one depicted a scene from Ward S. A hallway, a stairwell, a room with black walls. And in every one of them, standing somewhere in the corner, was a figure, tall, featureless, always watching. The final canvas made her blood run cold. It showed her, standing in room 13, holding a flashlight. Behind her, in the shadows, the figure loomed closer. Mylo had painted what he saw, perhaps while trapped in the dream, or maybe after something else had begun to see through him. Calia couldn't make sense of it anymore. Mylo was gone. The hospital was a labyrinth of secrets, and now, somehow, he was still painting somewhere. The canvases that arrived at her doorstep had no logical explanation. No one knew she had broken into Ward S. No one had seen her there. And yet, one of the paintings showed her in precise detail, her stance, her clothes, her flashlight beam hitting the exact corner of the room where she had stood in the dark. That image wasn't just unsettling. It was impossible. She handed the paintings over to an independent lab. The results came back with chilling findings. The materials used on the canvases included trace elements of sedatives, antipsychotics, and even human blood. The fibers of the bedding that wrapped them matched the linens used in St. Veora's discontinued wings. The lab also discovered something strange about the paint itself. It contained tiny fragments of neural tissue, as if biological material had been mixed in. The analysts couldn't explain how or why. The paintings weren't just art. They were warnings. Then, the story took a darker turn. 3 more families from different states reached out to Calia. Each had a loved one who had disappeared under similar circumstances, admitted for treatment, last seen in specialized psychiatric clinics, all with quiet ties to the same investment group that owned St. Veora. One mother had kept her son's sketchbook after he vanished. Inside were frantic drawings, dark rooms, endless staircases, and always the same figure in the background, a silhouette with featureless eyes and outstretched arms. The most alarming detail came from security footage leaked by a former technician from a psychiatric facility in Kansas. The footage showed a patient being wheeled down a corridor by a doctor who never showed up in employment records. Facial recognition software ran the image against old hospital staff and returned a 94% match to Dr. Elwin Haar, despite Haar having supposedly died nearly 2 decades ago. Even more disturbing, the doctor in the video had 6 fingers on his left hand. Calia took all this to a national investigative outlet. The journalist assigned to the case, Theo Marin, was skeptical at first. But when he reviewed the footage, the lab results, and the documentation from Project Somnix, his tone shifted. He had heard of similar experiments off-the-record research into dream manipulation, once rumored to be part of Cold War-era projects. But what Calia had was different. This wasn't just a psychological experiment. It was something far more invasive, more abstract. It tampered with the border between dream and waking life. Theo published a detailed expose within a week. It caused a storm on social media. The public was horrified, but the response from institutions was silence. No legal action followed, no arrests, no officials came forward. And within days, the article vanished from major platforms, replaced with Error 404 notices. Theo received a cease and desist letter and then simply disappeared. His apartment was found locked, his phone disconnected, his laptop wiped clean. Calia now lived like someone constantly being watched. She noticed dark cars parked across from her home. Her emails were flagged. Her phone acted strangely. But she kept the evidence backed up in dozens of encrypted drives and cloud locations. She swore never to stop until she found where Mylo was, or what was left of him. But the final piece of the puzzle came. 6 months later, an anonymous gallery in Berlin hosted an unannounced exhibit. The entrance was unmarked. Visitors reported that the walls were hung with large canvases, each one depicting surreal, horrific dreamscapes. They were signed with a familiar monogram. Me. The last painting in the gallery was kept behind black velvet curtains. Only those who stayed until closing time were allowed to view it. Witnesses described it as a portrait, an empty room with one figure standing alone, surrounded by black walls. The figure was facing a mirror, and in the mirror's reflection was not his own image, but a crowd of people staring back. Each face in the mirror matched photos of patients who had vanished across the years. Among them, one face stood out clearly. Calia Grent. She had never sat for a painting, but she recognized the look in her own eyes, fear, realization, and a shadow. Behind her shoulder, something had crossed over. Something now watched from within every reflection, every dream, every canvas dot, and Mylo had never left the hospital. He had simply become part of the nightmare.